Hello and welcome to what is going to be a 4 or 5 part series on audiobooks. So if you've been around here a little while, you will know that I really enjoy reading via audio. It's my preferred form of reading. I just find it much easier, much quicker, much better able to incorporate reading in more parts of my day by using audiobooks. So I thought that I would share some tips with you. I read about 150-ish audiobooks last year, so I think I'm pretty adept at audiobook reading and able to give some tips that hopefully you will also find helpful. And this video, part 1, is going to be about how to actually get into reading via audio, because it is a skill. The same way as you learned to read a physical book and read words on a page, you must also learn how to read using your ears. It's a different form of comprehension. So if you've tried audiobooks before and you've struggled, don't give up. These tips should hopefully help you to find a way for audiobooks to work for you. And my number 1 top tip to get into audiobooks is to start with a reread. Reread a favourite. The best thing to do is read a book that you have already read multiple times. The reason for this is that while you're listening to the story, if you miss parts, because you will miss parts while you're getting used to audiobook reading, you won't have to go back and re-listen because you know the story well enough, you know what's happening, you know what's gone on before. So if you miss a few bits here and there, it doesn't actually matter, and you can then focus instead on learning how to consume the story with your ears rather than with your eyes or your fingers if you read Braille. So that's my number 1 tip, is to start with a reread. But you may be somebody who doesn't like to reread books, or you might read the kinds of books that there isn't much point in rereading them, like mysteries and thrillers aren't so rereadable, that kind of thing. Or you might have already tried rereading and it's working well for you, but you're running out of things to reread and you feel like you still need entry-level audiobook reading. So for that you can go down in age range. That's my second tip. So if you are an adult who usually reads adult books, then you might want to go down to a YA or even down to a middle grade. You will just find that those are easier for you to take in the story because they're generally written in a more simplified way. I would also avoid reading things like epic fantasy, for example, unless it's a reread. You might find that that's a little bit tricky, especially with all the magic and that kind of thing, to get your head around. If you're not quite used to audiobooking, then you might want to steer clear. And that kind of is my third tip, is try to read, at least when you're starting out and getting used to the idea of audiobooking, start with quicker, easier reads, whatever genre that is for you. So for me, I find romances, mysteries, thrillers, particularly YA ones and middle grade ones, much easier and quicker to read than an epic fantasy is, because there's just not as much information being thrown at you, and particularly if it's set in our world, then you don't need to focus on too much world building. I'm talking about fantasy a little bit here because I'm presuming the vast majority of people watching my channel are fantasy readers, since that's the majority of what I read too. But I would say start with rereads, go down in age range and try shorter, quicker, easier type books, whatever that means for you. From there, you should hopefully have a good sort of starting point for your audiobook reading, and it's starting to feel a little bit more comfortable. And from that point, you can start thinking about bumping up your speed. A lot of people are a little bit astounded by people who listen to audiobooks sped up, or they feel a little bit afraid to do that themselves. I personally listen at 2.5 times speed, which for the most part, sometimes I don't quite go that high depending on the narrator. That's one thing to be mindful of, is that narrators have different starting speeds, so that might affect the speed at which you listen to the audiobook. But don't be afraid of increasing the speed. The simple fact of the matter is that when narrators are narrating a book, they are speaking particularly slowly, because unlike with a YouTube video where you can cut and snip things together, where it works a little bit better if you stumble over your words. So if I said 15 times here, I can just cut that out. It's not so easy to do that with an audiobook, particularly if it's a very long book. And so in general, audiobook narrators do try to just read the book all the way through with as few mistakes as they possibly can to cut down on the production time after they've finished recording. What that means is that they end up speaking much more slowly as they narrate, so that it's a little bit easier for them to not be stumbling over their words. If you've ever tried reading aloud, it's actually really challenging to do, and if you try to do it faster, you stumble more often. So if you slow down, reading aloud gets much easier. And so what generally tends to happen is that normal one-time speed on an audiobook can be quite slow, because the narrator has had to slow down to be able to read the words on the page clearly and without stumbling. What that means is that it might be too slow for you. And I think if you are finding that you are struggling to comprehend what is being read to you when you're listening to an audiobook, and you're struggling to stay engaged with the story, that is the time to turn the speed up a little bit, because probably what is happening is not that you aren't comprehending the audiobook, it's not that you can't read via audio, it's probably that it's just too slow and you need it a little bit quicker to keep up that pace. So I would suggest, after you've read a few books, just try, and you can start slowly at first. You can go up by, I mean, it depends on what app you're using, but you could go up by 0.5, 0.10, 0.20, 25. I generally tend to recommend going up in increments of 0.25 if you have that option. I know that not all audiobook players have that option, but if you do have that option, 0.25 is probably a good sort of speed to go up to. And what you'll find is that gradually you'll get used to that speed. So that's why I'm up at 2.5 now, because I started off at 1 speed, and then that started feeling a bit too slow, so I went to 0.25, started feeling too slow, 0.5, and so on and so on. So eventually you'll start increasing your reading speed via audio by doing that. The other thing that you can do, if you are ready to move beyond listening just to rereads or books that are at a lower age range or in a genre that isn't necessarily the most challenging for you, but you want to be reading a book that's slightly more challenging, but you want to kind of be able to develop your skill to be able to read that kind of book on audio, you can try immersion reading, which is a super fun way to read. Immersion reading is basically where you listen to the audiobook and you follow along with the words in the physical book as well. That is a really good way to also train yourself to increase your audio reading speed, because your eyes will naturally speed your ears up. Even if you're a slow physical reader, which I am, it's a big part of why I like reading by audio so much. So if you like to speed up and you like to physically read but you're a bit slow at physical reading, then putting on the audio can help you to keep it moving, and you can use that as a way to get used to listening to audiobooks at faster speeds as well. And the other thing that you can do is try picking an audiobook with multiple narrators, possibly even a full cast, or a graphic audio, which is an audio that is like a film. It's got sound effects. Those you can't really speed up, unfortunately, because there's kind of background music and that sort of thing, so it makes it sound a bit strange if you speed it up. But full cast or multiple narrator audiobooks can be sped up. They work the same way as a single narrator, but it can just help a little bit if you're struggling to differentiate between character voices while you're getting used to listening to audiobooks. So to recap, to get into reading via audiobook, you can start with rereads and reading below your age range and reading books that you find easier and quicker to read in general, whatever genre that means for you. Then when you inevitably start finding it a little bit slow, or if you just immediately feel like you're not remaining engaged or comprehending the story, bump up the speed a little bit. You can try immersion reading alongside that to help you get used to that faster narration sound. It will sound a little bit strange at first, but you'll get used to it pretty quickly. Or finally, you can try multiple cast or full cast or graphic audiobooks. So that is my kind of beginner's guide to how to get into audiobook reading. The next part in this series is going to be where you can find audiobooks, because I know that that can be really tricky. Audiobooks can be really expensive, so I'm going to be giving you some tips and tricks on where to find audiobooks. I hope that you will join me for that video too, and that you found this one useful. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks. Bye.